Being a Unitarian does not mean that we deem the Bible or Jesus as irrelevant. We value the tradition and the stories which have spoken to the hearts and minds of millions of people for 2,000 years. Although neither Jesus nor the Bible are idols at the center of our faith, we do not, in fact, worship them as God. And so what is at the center of our faith, I have been asked by you? My answer right now is your meaning-making, your integrity, your authenticity, your humility, your experience of God and life, your discretion, that which speaks to your heart's passion, to your heart's core. That is what is at the center of our faith. And we know that our faith benefits and needs engagement with a religious community. And as far as symbols go, another question came in this week. I understand that the flaming chalice is a common symbol for the Unitarian Universalist Church, but I'm not sure why. What's the history behind it, and why do I rarely, if ever, see a burning chalice during our regular Sunday services? At the opening of many Unitarian Universalist worship services around the country, most congregations light a flame inside of a chalice. This flaming chalice has become a well-known symbol of our denomination. Well, the chalice and the flame were actually brought together as a Unitarian symbol by Austrian artist Hans Deutsch in 1941. Living in Paris during the 1930s, Deutsch drew critical cartoons of Adolf Hitler. When the Nazis invaded Paris in 1940, he abandoned everything he had and fled to the south of France, and then to Spain, and then to Portugal. And it was in Portugal where he met the Reverend Charles Joy, who was the executive director of the Unitarian Service Committee of the time. The Service Committee was new. It had been founded in Boston to assist Eastern Europeans, among them Unitarians as well as Jews, who needed to escape Nazi persecution. From his Lisbon headquarters, Joy oversaw a secret network of couriers and agents. The Unitarian Service Committee was an unknown organization in 1941, and this was a special handicap in the cloak and dagger world, where establishing trust quickly across barriers of language and nationality and faith could mean life instead of death. There were disguises and signs and countersigns and midnight runs across guarded borders were the means of freedom in those days. And so Joy asked Deutsch to create a symbol for their paperwork, to make them look official, to give dignity and importance to them, and at the same time to symbolize the spirit of the work that was being done. So Hans Deutsch made his lasting contribution to the Unitarian Service Committee, and as it turned out, also to Unitarian Universalism. With his pen and ink, he drew a chalice with a flame, the kind of chalice which the Greeks and Romans put on their altars, the holy oil burning in it as a symbol of helpfulness and sacrifice. That was in the mind of the artist. There is a fact, though, that in its pen and ink style, sometimes it remotely symbolizes a cross. And even though that wasn't in his mind at the time, it does also have merit, because we don't limit our work to Christians, and yet we do stem from the Christian tradition, with the cross symbolizing Christianity and its central theme of sacrificial love. So the flaming chalice design was made into a seal for paperwork and a badge for the agents moving refugees to freedom. In time, it became a symbol of Unitarian Universalism all over the world. And the story of Hans Deutsch reminds us that the symbol of a flaming chalice stood in the very beginning for a life of service, of manifesting our values in the world. When Deutsch designed the flaming chalice, he had never seen a Unitarian or Universalist church, nor had he heard a sermon. But what he had seen was the faith in action of a people who were willing to risk all for others in a time of urgent need. So today, The flaming chalice is a symbol of the UU Service Committee and of the Unitarian Universalist Association. It functions as a logo for hundreds of congregations. It also has become a focal point for worship to unite congregations with the larger movement. So there will be a chalice lighting and a reading at the beginning and an extinguishing at the end of a service. My favorite chalice is actually two circles surrounding a chalice that is off-center, because it reminds me of both our Unitarian heritage, our Universalist heritage, and the fact that no symbol is at the center of our faith. Even in many of our more historically Christian congregations in Boston, where they may have even a cross in the sanctuary, the cross sits off-center on the chancel. But All Souls does not light a chalice in worship service for several reasons. One is that when the symbol came about in the 1940s, this church had already established a liturgical tradition that was serving it very well. All Souls was founded in 1921, and by the time that congregations picked up on lighting the chalice as a liturgical tradition, All Souls had been worshiping for nearly 40 years. So instead, you will see chalice jewelry and a chalice and the O of the souls of our own logo on our own paperwork. And you'll find us lighting a chalice usually accompanied with a reading in order to begin our committee meetings or small group ministries with intention. But you will not see it in our worship. This leads to another question that I had from someone who wanted to know why All Souls has a particularly formal worship. All Souls is the largest Unitarian Universalist church in the movement and has traditionally, larger churches tend to have more formal worship. Now, why that is, we can talk about for hours on end. But our church has had a tradition of taking its worship very seriously, and that continues today. Robes and processional, the invocation and opening with our covenant reflect that historical liturgy that has sustained this congregation for generations. Our liturgy reflects a respect for this church's history and the tradition of our faith, as well as leaving some room for an eye to the future. Another historical question posed was the connection between Transylvania and Unitarian Universalism. In the painting of Simple Gifts 2, there's a blue and white vase that holds a single flower. That vase is from a Unitarian village in Transylvania where Unitarianism began as an organized religion in 1568 during the Protestant Reformation. During that time, Francis David became the founder of the first Unitarian faith to be known literally as Unitarian. Francis David had originally trained as a Catholic priest before becoming a Lutheran, and then a Calvinist, and then finally a Unitarian. He asked lots of questions. In the year 1968, King John Sigismund called a debate in the city of Turda to determine which of the established religions in the area would be declared the official religion of his realm. And during that very lengthy debate, Francis David held his ground against all religions in the region and convinced King Sigismund that to declare one religion as the state religion and to compel his people to follow that religion was wrong. So King Sigismund proclaimed religious freedom throughout the realm, the first such declaration known in history. And the victory did not last long. Within 3 years, King John Sigismund was dead, and his successor did not hold his tolerant views. Francis David was ultimately sentenced to prison for refusing to acknowledge that Jesus Christ was to be at least adored, and he died in prison in 1579. The Unitarian and quite Christian faith that Francis David founded is still alive today among many of the ethnic Hungarians living in Transylvania region today. And our own American Unitarians and members of this church travel to Transylvania often to visit those churches and our heritage.